My name is Jeremy Cowan, and I'm the editorial director and co-founder of IoT Now, and I am your moderator today. I want to thank you, the hundreds of you who are joining us live around the world. We've got a very interesting discussion for you today, brought to you by Sierra Wireless with independent analysis from ABI Research. We have a lot of expertise to call on as well. First, I'd like to introduce Dan Shea, who is Managing Director and Vice President, Business to Business at ABI Research, as he will be our first speaker. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Jeremy.
Good to have you. Next, let me welcome Scott Waldron. Scott is Director of Marketing for Cloud and Connectivity Services at Sierra Wireless. It's good to have you here, Scott.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for hosting today.
And finally, I want to introduce you all to Cyril Hulin, who is Vice President, Product Strategy and Marketing, Cloud and Connectivity Services, also from Sierra Wireless. Cyril, welcome.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Well, we're here today to learn why customers are moving away from traditional roaming SIMs and networks in favor of services designed specifically for the needs of connected products. This webinar is being recorded, and you can access it in 48 hours or less via our website, iot-now.com. Before we start, I just want to remind you that this is an interactive webinar. We want to know what you think, so we will be holding a poll in a moment, and we'll see the results immediately. At the end, we want to put your questions to our speakers in a question and answer session. Starting right now, you can send me the questions for our speakers, and you can do that at any time during the webinar. Just click on the questions button and type them into the window provided. I will, of course, put as many of your questions to the speakers as time allows later on. So start sending me your questions right now. And if you're having any technical issues with audio or whatever, you can also use the question window to get advice from our technical support team. Now it's time to hear from the first of our panel, Dan Shea of ABI Research. Dan, over to you.
Great, thank you, Jeremy, and great to be here. So to start this webinar off today, as with many webinars as it relates to IoT and the older term M2M, a little bit on the market and the size of the market. And in this case, as you can see from the presentation, we're showing the size of the market in terms of connections and how that breaks out by different technologies. And we've broken it out into the two backhaul components around IoT connections, one leveraging fixed line and satellite as that transport medium, the other being cellular, and some of the newer technologies in this area called low power wide area includes both proprietary and the recently approved standard technologies on the cellular side, specifically in LTE. And so, as you can see, from a market perspective, it's still mainly fixed line today, and this is across 32 application segments that ABI covers. And cellular is an important part of that. But over time, as we go through 2020, we see that cellular and some of the low power wide area technologies actually are growing much faster. It's about a 30% rate. And we'll actually catch up with some of the connections as it relates to fixed line connections and satellite. Satellite is just a very small part of this. However, it's also the case that some of these short-range wireless technologies are also contributing and playing a role, and actually even a bigger role just in terms of total connections. And in this case, as we show here, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and 802.15.4, Z-Wave, Zigbee being some of the technologies that comprise the 802.15.4, will actually even grow to a much higher level in terms of total connections. Those are going to be off of gateways, but also off of connected machines. And on the right, I show some of the top application segments. So for short-range wireless, those technologies, smart home is definitely going to be a big contributor to that. Not the only contributor. There's actually, of all the 32 application segments, not all, but the majority are leveraging some sort of short-range wireless technology to connect other sensors and to add to the solution. OEM telematics is also a big one as well. And that's some of the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connections that we're going to find in connected cars. For cellular and low power wide areas, it's definitely dominated by OEM telematics. The connected car is going to really add dramatically to the total size of this market. Fleet management is a big one, but smart metering as well. And smart metering has been sort of a mainstay in the IoT market and will continue moving forward out into the early 2020s. And then fixed line satellite, again, smart meters is a big part. If you look across the world, it's not just connecting over wireless technologies, it's connecting over other types of technologies, which include in this fixed line category. Smart home, definitely a big one. Video surveillance is actually also very big. So there's a lot of legacy cameras out there, the analog connections. Many of those are converting to IP connections. So you can kind of see we really have a large and growing market, growing from about 1.5 billion connections when we consider all those technologies out through exceeding 5 billion by. As we move on, and I'll give everyone a minute to catch up here, from a revenue perspective, and let me explain this a little bit so we understand what some of these revenue categories are. So I showed in the previous slide the connections, but here the question is what are the revenues that are generated from these connections? So we have 6 categories, 6 primary categories that really comprise the entire value chain for the IoT market. The purple is security services. Those are primarily network security services in the transport, some physical security hardware and software. It includes things like SLAs on the transport for packet loss and jitter and that sort of thing. It also includes revenues related to transport security that include authentication, encryption, and some certificate management. The professional services piece is way on the other end of the value chain, and that includes the applications, application development, system integration work, and then just general management and consulting services. Connectivity services really apply to the cellular and satellite revenues generated on that connection if those are technologies that are used. Network services is really related to the connectivity management. Data and app platform services, that includes everything from getting the data off the device and into a device cloud where you can act on the data, where applications can leverage that. That category also includes those segments such as commercial telematics and the smart home. There's actually an entire set of services wrapped around that particular segment and the platform that supports that. And then the data analytics services, that includes everything from storage and connectivity, I should say storage and integration, to the visualization, and then all the analytics services, which include predictive and prescriptive. And so as you can see, right now we're still in somewhat of a do-it-yourself stage with many companies where they're leveraging a lot of professional services to create that connected IoT solution. However, over time, we see that professional services will decline as a share of revenue. Even though revenues continue to grow because the number of connections are growing, as a share we think that's going to decline. And we believe, and we're starting to see this, that there will be more standardized offerings, there will be more verticalized offerings, which is going to make it much easier for companies to get their products or machines or their sensors deployed and connected. What's going to change and grow as part of the revenue mix is the data analytics side. And that's not a huge surprise because ultimately the goal here is to leverage the data off these machines for remote management, to develop better products and that sort of thing. So we look at this, what's going to change significantly is less on the customization side, even though that will be a big part of it, more use of data analytics, and also note that the platforms that are, we think there's going to be just more verticalized type services based on sort of a platform will continue to maintain that share. Overall, when we look at ARPUs, the revenues per connection will continue to increase, a lot of that driven by the data analytics piece. And I think the last point to point out on this slide is that really as you increase your use of data analytics, the solution, the maturity of solutions and the maturity of the companies in the market continues to improve and grow, and that's why you are leveraging some of the more advanced services in the data analytics side as part of this. We did a survey probably about 6 months ago, late summer last year, and we asked IoT suppliers and end users a series of questions. I should point out that about 40% of the respondents on the end user side were industrial markets, utilities, manufacturing, that sort of thing, which you have to keep in mind when we think about these survey results. But piggybacking on the last slide, what was interesting and what's clear in the market is that most companies are still in the very investigative stage of this market. There's not as many companies that have rolled out commercial products, and certainly not a lot of companies that have really leveraged some of the advanced functionality that you get with the data and leveraging the various different types of analytics solutions, particularly predictive and prescriptive type solutions. In some companies, some firms actually measure this, and they think that we've only really tapped, or I should say only about 10% of the market is extensively using these IoT solutions. So we really have a long way to go, and I think these survey results really demonstrate how early we are still in the market. Another question that we asked, and I thought was good to talk a bit to as it relates to this webinar, is, what are the primary reasons for implementing an IoT solution? And these responses came both from the suppliers, what customers are saying to suppliers, as well as what the end users are saying themselves. And you can kind of see that the top reasons are very much focused on the product itself, I would say, related to improving the efficiency. If we just think about just utilization generally, that's a product of efficiency, product quality, and uptime. And you can see those top responses really kind of get to that need in the market. And it's really very much related to existing products that are out in the market. And this all makes sense. The develop new services as the top one is interesting. I think that's partly influenced by the fact that the suppliers were answering this, and they are at the table with companies because really ultimately it's about not only leveraging the connectivity for remote management and that sort of thing, but ultimately it's also develop new services. What I found most interesting, though, is actually the bottom 5 responses. When we look at changing your business model from something that's more CapEx to OpEx, trying to improve SLAs and warranties, even leveraging the connectivity to improve worker safety and security. These are more longer-term items, and again, as I showed on the previous slide, this shows that we're still in an early stage and that companies are just not quite there at looking at how IoT can really dramatically change how they do work, interact with customers, and how it will ultimately change their business in general. So a little bit on the deployment challenges, these are very much influenced by the respondents that were participating in this survey, but provides a nice bit of insight on some of the challenges and where I think suppliers in this market really need to focus. So, one of the areas is that, particularly with existing products, you need to deploy sensors and communication hardware. And one of the top challenges noted in the survey was that, one, sensors are not secure enough. And that very much is driven by some of the respondents in like the energy and manufacturing markets, where one, they have to be very concerned about that, but they're just not necessarily that aspect of the market of trying to get sensors that meet the particular needs of that market, i.e. security being one of those issues. That's a bit of a challenge for them. So there's certain markets where that's just not there. But even deploying the sensors, there's challenges there. And again, very much driven by some of these, quote, more legacy markets as it relates to that survey, but definitely still an issue. And actually, when you look at some of these smart manufacturing and more of these industrial segments, the sensor aspect of this is still something that's evolving, and there's a lot of effort being put into that. As it relates to connectivity, this was also an interesting one. We always hear this notion that connectivity costs are too high. Part of this has to do with the fact that many companies are still leveraging some fixed line technologies where they don't necessarily have to pay for the cost of connectivity that you might get with satellite and fixed line. I mean, you certainly don't get the coverage that you do with those satellite and fixed line technologies, but that is always sort of cited as something that's an issue. It also highlights the fact, though, that there's still development going on as it relates to connectivity, and that's why we see all these low power wide area technologies, both the proprietary ones as well as the standardized ones that are going to be based on LTE technologies. And then connectivity choice is not suitable for the application. Again, this is related to, I think, some of these markets where you have to deploy sensors, and ultimately the connections, as we showed in those previous slides, are going to be deployed through some of these short-range wireless technologies where the power requirements, where you don't necessarily want to be, where you won't have power, or you don't want to be changing batteries all the time. Again, that's where low power wide area technologies are really going to play a role and really change the game as it relates to improving the options for connectivity, as well as bringing the costs down. Device cloud to cloud services, this really has to do with the plumbing, as I sort of talked about before. That's where platform providers come into play, but you can't do anything with the data until you sort of get the thing connected and get the data into the cloud so it can be acted upon. You know, one of the top reasons cited by the respondents here was limited device management capabilities. And at ABI, we've actually done analysis on this, looking at some of the device management platforms and the vendors. And there's actually a big difference between some of the vendors that might offer different, like a gateway or some other devices, and how easy it is to manage that device, and that's critical. And so there's big differences there. The poor data cloud access capabilities, I think that's a bit of a legacy issue. Early on, with some of the early platforms, the cloud aspect of those platforms just wasn't as sophisticated. I think that's changed dramatically. That's less of an issue, and companies can get access to the data much easier and can store, and get access to a lot of data for that matter. Data analytics, as I noted earlier, that's a huge part of the value that's generated by connecting these products. And one of the challenges, and this continues, this has been going on for the last several years, is just internally at companies, they just don't have the data scientists on staff. And so that will continue to be a need, and there's certainly a big need for data scientists. But I think what's interesting about this market is that recognizing that's the challenge, many of the analytics vendors are investing in automation tools to just make it much easier to take the data, map a set of algorithms to it so that you can leverage the data and do some interesting work with it. So that's sort of a trend that's happening, and continue to see automation as a big part of it. Data integration tool is insufficient. That just has to do with the fact there's just a lot of data that's more and more third-party types of data are being integrated into the entire solution to provide the context, but also, and that provides the value. And the last one, the professional services piece. To me, this is really very interesting and highlights the challenges in the market. The top two reasons: lack of suppliers with end-to-end vendor knowledge, and then just coordinated challenges between vendors. An IoT solution really includes working with lots of different technology and lots of different vendors. And where the market is evolving to is companies that are going to bring to the table all the services or many of the services needed to create an IoT solution. That's happening as we speak, and it gets to these two issues, just the fact that there's a lot of complexity as it relates to IoT solutions, and there needs to be a way to simplify that. So I'm going to summarize then. Certainly cellular, in our view, when we've been counting this market, that's where the action is. And it's the connected car that's really going to drive that. But it even goes beyond that, and particularly when you think about the opportunities with some of these low-power wide area technologies where it's going to be much easier to deploy sensors to generate even more data for the particular application. That's going to be big. Retail, I would say, is another example of where they're actually using cellular because they need to take more machines off their network from security purposes. So cellular is really expanding out in a number of different application markets. It's not just for mobile markets. And I think this next point, as it relates to low power wide area technologies, there's really kind of two types. There's the proprietary types that are out there right now, and then there's the standardized types, which are all based on LTE technologies. Those are both available, and they will find uses in different applications. We're starting to see that on the proprietary side. It typically tends to be, it's a question of whether those technologies will have a broad enough network, a network that has the coverage that's needed for particular applications. About 2 years ago, we asked the question, well, will it be private networks or public networks? We're starting to see those technologies, the proprietary ones, really tending to focus more on the private, although we'll see some public networks. I think it'll be very regionally focused. But then again, when you compare that to LTE and now all the variants, particularly Cat-M and NB-IoT, where the scale's already there, the networks are there, it's just a question of when they are available, which is going to be Cat-M 2017 timeframe, depending on the region, NB-IoT 2018, 2019. And then last point, when we did the survey, the top non-technical challenges for IoT, one was security. Smart home is the poster child, but it really extends across all the application segments, both industrial and sort of more on the B2B2C markets. It includes, connected car. We've seen all types of articles on security issues there, but it also gets into power plants and water utilities and all that sort of thing. And then the last point here, and hopefully this has been bore out from this discussion here, once a company invests in a solution, the biggest challenge, an IoT solution, the biggest challenge is supplier diversity and offer complexity. And so there is a need, and that's why you're seeing consolidation around some companies really trying to offer end-to-end services to address that particular issue. So with that, that's a baseline, and I'm going to pass it back to Jeremy.
Dan, thank you very much for that. Well, I'm pleased to say we have come to the part where we get to hear your views as our audience. One thing is worth pointing out. Please remember the answers here are anonymous. None of us can see how you reply. All you have to do is click the button beside the relevant answer that you can see in front of you now. And the question is, how many connected machines do you have deployed today? Answer A, are you getting started? B, 1 to 1,000 devices. 1,000 to 10,000, D, 10,000 to 100,000, or E, over 100,000 machines connected. So I'll just give one more moment for people to make their replies. How many connected machines do you currently have deployed as of today? And we can go straight to the results on that. Let's see what you've said. How many connected machines do you have deployed today? Well, the overwhelming majority, or the overwhelming number, clearly are just getting started with just over 40%. And they're clearly interested, and that's great. That's what today is all about. 25% fall into the 1 to 1,000 category, and as you can see for yourselves, almost 10% now have a significant representation with 1,000 to 10,000. 6.8% are showing 10,000 to 100,000 deployed today, and a whopping 17.5% already have over 100,000 connected machines as of today. I think it's worth asking our panel. Scott, let me ask you, are these poll results in line with your expectations?
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, these are, and I think we're going to look through some examples as we move through the slides here to give people on the phone an idea of how that compares, with customers we work with and our view of the market. So definitely, I mean, we have certainly a market that's not quite at the at a mature level yet. So we're going to see lots and lots of companies trying to figure out how to get started, try and build their ROI models and business cases. So not surprising.
Good. Thanks, Scott. Well, in fact, it's you that I need to turn to now, because we'd like to hear your views, if you would, taking this further and drilling in a little bit deeper. Over to you, Scott.
Thanks, Jeremy. So what Cyril and I would like to do, so we're both from Sierra Wireless, we'd like to kind of give you the Sierra Wireless view on connectivity challenges, why we're in this market now, what our customers were asking for. So a lot of this lines up really nicely with what Dan talked about. Dan has a much broader market view given what he does. So the way we wanted to do this, we wanted to start with kind of 4 use cases. So these are real use cases. These are not kind of made up examples. There are companies out there that are deployed today, in production today, across a number of markets, and with much different profiles of numbers of connected devices, ROI models, business models, etc. So if we look at these, we have kind of on the left, we have a high-end connected medical device. So the idea of a connected service, the idea there is to save money by streamlining operations, right? So all the ROI models are going to be either based on saving money or increasing your market share, making more money. So on the left-hand side, we have that idea of trying to streamline the operations, make it more efficient. As we move to the left, we move through a kind of fixed gas monitoring use case. So not smart metering in the case of an electrical grid, but certainly in the case of gas tanks. We move through a telematics example or UBI example, and then another connected industrial example. So regardless of the use case or the segment here, what's common for all these customers that have gone into production, and these are production examples, is that they have had some sort of ROI model or business case that they've built. Now, these business cases have, in the early cases of a maturity, a market maturity, they have a certain amount of risk or uncertainty, and that's what we want to look at today, right? So in the case of the left-hand one, this is a very high-end connected machine. It has a service contract. It needs to be up all the time or the lab is down. The issues here are that these are fixed machines. They are often deep indoors. Connectivity is a challenge in many of these cases, both from a fixed perspective or cellular. So when you're building a business case around this, you have to try and understand how many of my devices are going to be connected, how many can't be connected, what do I do when I get in an area where I can't connect it, how does that impact my business case? So these are the challenges that these kinds of use cases run up against. As we move to the right, the first one, to take it back to our poll question, this company is in the thousands of connected devices kind of volume, if you want to look at it that way. As we move to the right, we have a newer company. So this is a company trying to disrupt an existing market, and the idea here is that they want to bring certainty to kind of the gas market in Latin America, so that customers understand when they're running out of gas, when they need to refill, and so that utilities understand when they can go and service customers. So really a market disruption, bringing a new solution into an existing market. In their case, challenges are these are fixed tanks, they're on roofs, so trying to fix connectivity issues once these tanks are in service is really expensive, often will blow up a business case. Also a mix of very rural and very high dense kind of city environments, so connectivity can be a challenge there as well. As we move to the right, we have more of a UBI telematics example. The interesting thing here is the volumes on this one are very, very big. They're hundreds of thousands, right? Approaching the high hundreds of thousands. And as you can imagine, managing that size of a fleet, connectivity-wise, making sure everything's working, always connected, getting the data you need, is really, really challenging. And then the last one, connected industrial equipment. A company looking to add product differentiation here, provide a much better user experience. Really big global fleet. So how do you manage connectivity across multiple regions internationally, and how do you keep the entire fleet up and running across multiple connectivity providers? These are all really big challenges that aren't necessarily easy to solve. And so what that means is that all of these customers, when they're kind of building their business case, they're trying to answer these questions, and they don't necessarily have the answers from day one. So, for example, how many machines will I be able to connect? So if it's only 80%, is that good enough? Will I be able to make my business case if I do that? How can I move from 80% coverage up to 100%, 99, 95%? That's what these companies need to figure out, and they need solutions to help them do that. As we move to the right, how much is it going to cost me to fix a connectivity issue when a device goes down out in the field in the middle of nowhere? If you're paying a few dollars a month for connectivity, under $10 a month, and you have to spend $600 to roll a truck, $1,000 to roll a truck, that often blows up your business case. So these are all the things that these companies have tried to build around their business cases. As we move to the right, how do you manage 1 million connected cars, devices, whatever they may be? That's a really big operational problem, and it requires solutions and tools to help you do that. And it requires vendor management across multiple vendors, as Dan said. So how do you do that? Do you look at vendors that can bring everything to you, tools and the full stack? Does that help you? Does that help you build your business case? And then lastly, we were talking about global deployments. How many networks do I need? And every time I add a new network provider, that's a new platform, that's a new vendor to manage, right? So it adds complexity to my solution. So these are all the questions these types of customers have had to address or minimize risk around when they've been deploying their solutions. So moving on, the question they ultimately have to answer is, is this a technically viable solution? Can I connect enough machines? Is the business case viable? Can I make money at this, or am I saving enough money? For the high net volume of deployed assets, what's the cost of that complexity? How much is it going to cost me to manage that? How many people do I need in my NOC center to keep these running, right? So at the end of the day, we have a number of examples here of customers that went ahead, right? They kind of managed the risk around these questions and the business models. They went ahead. But the bigger question you end up with, or you run into, is what's the cost of that uncertainty for the market in general, right? So for these 4 examples, they decided to go ahead. They were able to manage the risk around their business model, and they decided to move ahead, and they now are in production with thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of machines connected. If you look at the maturity model, as Dan said, we're certainly in the beginning of that curve, or that ramp up towards the into the growth area. The customers that are deploying today, the fallout will be that maybe they don't hit the ROI they expect. They need to manage to that. The bigger impact for the market is that the majority of the market still sits on the sidelines until you can bring more certainty and better solutions to them to give them confidence that when they roll out, they'll know what their what their business model looks like. And that's where we are today. And that's where, Sierra as a company is looking to deploy solutions to help our customers get there with more certainty, more quickly, with better ROI. So what I want to do now is I want to hand over to Cyril. Cyril is going to walk through what Sierra Wireless is doing from a connectivity perspective to help our customers here. As Dan mentioned, there's a number of technologies in play around low power wide area. Sierra Wireless is playing a lot in the LTE Cat-M space coming. What we have now, though, is we have a connectivity service that's really designed for the IoT market and will also help address a lot of these challenges that our customers face. So now what we'll do is we'll move over to Cyril so he can walk you through how we solve some of these problems.
Thank you, Scott. So first, I'll address a picture of a certain number of key pain points we've identified as pain points and challenges we've identified from our customers. First, in terms of coverage, what do I do when I need to cover deep indoors needs, rural needs, multi-country needs in mature markets, emerging markets? How can I address and guarantee the quality of service of my business solution? How can I improve the uptime rate of my solution end-to-end? How can I minimize data production chain outages? In terms of flexibility, how can I ensure technology continuity when I choose a 2G, 3G, 4G module, not knowing when will the sunset of a certain technology happen for operator XYZ? How can I avoid MNO lock-in and keep a certain level of freedom in the long run with regards to my SIM supplier? And last point, simplicity. How can I unify my IT hooks in order to better manage my SIMs, my devices? How can I ease the management of legacy SIMs from operator XYZ, my future suppliers, and kind of have a homogeneous tool set to troubleshoot and manage all my connectivity needs. So these are the major pain points that are being identified by our customers. The next slide shows us the different options our customers have in front of them. First, a local MNO SIM with domestic single operator coverage with a certain number of drawbacks in terms of white zones, gray zones, very often assets and solutions that are tailored for mobile telephony. MNO roaming SIMs, in some cases dedicated to machines, and that very often provides the footprint of an MNO alliance. And on the far top right-hand side, the solution we've developed, which is the best compromise in terms of technical capabilities and ease to deploy. That is a mix of roaming and a smart agent that we have developed on our SIM, and the fact that we own, operate core network infrastructure, which was architectured and developed dedicated for machine-to-machine applications. So a quick overview on the connectivity service providers landscape. On the left-hand side, the radio access networks, the MNOs, who own and operate all of the assets we mentioned here, the RAN, the radio access network, the core network infrastructure, SIM electrical profile, all the regulatory resources needed to operate a network, SIM management tools, value-added services related to IP, billing capabilities, of course, sales and distribution channels. So that's all the assets MNOs own and operate. And on the far right side of the spectrum, the plain simple distributors or light MVNOs will own and operate sales forces, eventually billing tools, eventually IP-related value-added services, and SIM management tools. And in the middle, you have two families of players, the light MVNOs, the full MVNOs, which have nothing to do with one another. Again, the light MVNO is very close to a SIM distributor, distributing SIMs from local MNOs or roaming MNO or roaming SIMs. And on the other side, the full MVNOs or MVNEs will own, operate core network infrastructure, so produce all the traffic, voice, data, SMS, signaling traffic, will own the SIM, its electrical profile, the encryption keys, algorithms, regulatory resources that is used on the SIM, and this gives a certain number of strengths. And this is the technical positioning that Sierra Wireless has chosen in order to develop its connectivity services. So we are a full MVNO, and in some cases a full MVNE. And this relies on extensive core network infrastructure in a certain number of countries, and some SIM capabilities and on-SIM an on-SIM agent which we have patented and developed, which I will highlight more in depth. So our value proposition relies on the following pillars. First, our SIM is truly global and multi-operator in every country. And in most countries, it offers coverage to all networks in the country. Then it relies, as I said, on a patented smart agent, which unlike a traditional roaming SIM, which will eventually provide some multi-operator coverage, but which will keep stuck on the MNOs of an alliance, and which would switch over from one network to another when there's a complete drop of the network coverage. Our smart applet, our smart on-SIM applet, will detect network events, network failures, and this will trigger a network reselection dynamically. So this smart SIM will autonomously and dynamically detect network events, network failures, and switch over from network A to network B when any event is detected that has an impact on the end-to-end POS perceived by the device. It is also a certain number of mechanisms dedicated to the detection of outages in the access network, but also in the backend network, in the transport network, which constitutes the end-to-end production chain of data, but also signaling and SMS services, for example. And we have a certain number of mechanisms that's operated by the SIM and by the core network, which enable to improve the end-to-end resilience of the service produced. Number fourth item, the IoT acceleration platform, which is a unified control plan to manage SIMs, devices, data management. I will go more in depth into this, the proposition of this platform. It enables to manage third-party SIMs, our SIMs, and also EUICC SIMs. And last but not least, very key, the flexibility we offer in terms of business model and price plan adaptation to the customer's business model and constraints. So the IoT acceleration platform is dedicated to the management of connectivity, obviously, our connectivity, the Sierra Wireless SIM and connectivity, but also enables to onboard third-party SIMs in order to flatten the management of legacy SIMs a customer may have in hands at some point of time, and eventually future SIMs for other geographies. And it also enables the management of EUICC profiles with a complete subscription management lifecycle. It also enables to manage the what we call the application enablement solution. So that is the capacity to produce agile business applications, creation of dashboards, creation of alerting systems, easing also the data collection, data analysis, and device management. And to conclude, two examples of customers we have deployed recently and less recently. Veolia is one with two different use cases and applications. The first one is for data collection and business analytics for water treatment in Western Europe. So very mission critical, obviously, with an expectation in terms of uptime rate, which is extremely high. And the second one, which is the connectivity for fuel and gas tanks for households and businesses. So smart metering for remote, indoors, rural areas in Western Europe also. And the second one is called Nube. It's a deployment in Mexico for smart metering applications, smart metering and also smart refueling optimization in Mexico. And this is a deployment that has started and which will account for huge numbers of gas tanks in rural and urban areas in Mexico. Thank you very much. I pass on the mic to Jeremy, I guess.
Cyril, thank you very much. That is excellent, gives us plenty of food for thought. It's time for questions from the audience now. You've already given us plenty to think about, and the audience have responded. We've got a host of questions. We'll do our best to get through as many as possible. Just a thought, any we can't answer now, we will pass to the sponsors and they can deal with them one-on-one outside this. The first question, how do you work with MNOs? Somebody says, I'm currently committed to a contract with an MNO. Can I still use your SIM? That might be a question for Scott.
Actually, Cyril is probably the best on that one. So why don't we let
So there's probably several sub-questions here. So the first, the platform, the way we've designed the platform is to ease this typical case. Is what do I do with my legacy? So the platform and the tool set, the APIs, enables to onboard legacy fleets of SIMs in order to have the same user interface and tools to manage my legacy SIMs and my Sierra Wireless SIMs. So that's one part of the answer. Perhaps another part of the answer is depending on the MNO agreement that is in place. How can I transition to our solution? So that's probably something which could be addressed in some cases on a case-by-case basis, depending on what's the legacy, the type of agreement, and how this can be transitioned.
Thanks, Cyril. Somebody else has asked, is this available right now? How many customers are using it?
Yes, so Cyril again, yes, it is available right now. It's been deployed for a little while. We have today about almost 700,000 SIMs deployed in almost 60 countries. And that accounts for a few hundred customers across the globe. So Scott, maybe you have more precisions.
While I've got you, Cyril, there's another question for you here. How do you manage from legacy SIMs and EUICC? Does the platform have integration to manage EUICC from other operators and service providers?
Yes, we are. Actually, this is still in the course of development. We have legacy EUICCs from EUICC GSMA versions 1 and 2, but this is something we want to turn the page from, since it's the former EUICC, pre-standard EUICC, and we're now in the process of integration of the platform with EUICC versions 3 and 4. Which are in the process of being standardized, or the standard is being finalized. And this is their version of EUICC, which will be completely interoperable, meaning between a subscription management platform and SIM vendors. So this is the platform we are integrating, and which will be available on our IoT acceleration platform in the coming months.
Thank you, Cyril. This may be one for Scott, I'm not sure. Does Sierra Wireless consider itself an MVNO with a full core network, HLR, HSS, and billing platform?
I mean, either of us can handle that, but yes, that's, per kind of the slide 18 where Cyril was talking about the landscape, we are a full MVNO or MVNE, depending on the context, and we have our own core network. We have our own SIMs, so it allows us to offer a lot of the services that that we need to offer our customers.
Yeah. Next question: the SIM Global Sierra works with. Does it work with any OEM equipment?
Yes, well, yeah. The answer is yes. For major deployments, there's always it's always useful to test and validate the proper inner working, but it's tailored and designed to work with any type of OEM equipment, module, modem, gateway.
I don't want Dan to feel left out. There's a question here for him. Your connectivity breakout, Dan, someone has said it shows fixed line and BT/802.15.4 dominating in the future. What's the basis for saying action is in cellular?
From a growth rate, so you got to remember that the short-range wireless connections are emanating off of those backhaul connections, which is both the fixed line and it's primarily the fixed line and the satellite. And so the reason why cellular is hot is because it's got the highest growth rate. The fixed line is, I think, growing at about 15–16%, whereas cellular is growing at 30% in terms of connection. So certainly cellular, and you got to remember that we've only just introduced some of the low power wide area technologies, which have the potential to really add significantly to the total number of connections. And I think in general, we're going to have to wait and see how kind of the device environment sort of plays out, particularly around sensors. I think we're going to need some innovation there, just from the perspective that we need, some real interesting types of sensor to devices. I mean, something that's just as easy that you pick up at the store and you can just activate it when you buy it, and that allowed to either work in some industrial environments or whatever it might be. But I think these numbers will reflect much bigger numbers on the cellular side once we see how the Cat-M and NB-IoT technologies play a role.
Thanks, Dan. Cyril, there's another one here for you. This is from an ISP. Which LPWA network is your IoT acceleration platform integrated with?
Today, it's APIs are standardized with I think it's with LoRa. And it's open to be. It's also pre-integrated for satellite systems and LoRa, I believe. But that's I would be able to provide more precision on that offline.
Yeah. Okay. This may be something for offline as well. But from the same questioner, how did you integrate with a SIMless network? Is that something you want to take offline as well?
With a seamless network?
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure I get the question. Seamless in the sense of without SIM, or seamless?
Seamless as in without SIM, yeah.
I'm not sure I get the question. What kind of seamless network?
Okay, well,
like
if
LPWA or?
We'll move on, and we can always come back to that one offline. Okay. Somebody wants to know, can you please describe the types of plans available? For example, private APN, public / dynamic IP, etc.
Yes, so the spectrum of technical options is very wide in terms of IP addressing, in terms of radius, provisioning, delegation, in terms of private APN settings, in terms of also connection between our infrastructure, our core network infrastructure, and the customers' POPs, the customers' application servers, in order to privatize the network access. We are extremely flexible, and we have many types of different topologies of setups for specific customers. We operate for extremely mission-critical customers in the security space, for governments, for armies, security, in the security healthcare spaces. So all of these, in some cases, require very specific setups, and so options are of that sort. Also for location-based services, for USSD is also an interesting option for, or an interesting barrier and solution for transactional types of services. CSD is also something we offer, and is, even though quite prehistoric, is also often used as a backup solution. So the list of options is very wide, and we're extremely flexible in terms of technical setup that we can implement.
We've got some extra questions, and I think this may be one for you, Cyril, but correct me if I'm wrong. Why do you consider OTA updates as being poorly supported?
The question is not that clear. OTA, firmware OTA, or I think that's it.
I think it was from one of the slides, Cyril, where we talked about OTA updates to the SIM card, I believe, what they're referring to.
Okay. Okay, but so in that case, it's not that it's badly supported. In order to have access to the SIM, to its capabilities, to its I would say power, obviously the SIM needs to be. We need to have access to the core network that operates the SIM. So the encryption key, the SIM credential, and the HLR, which is part of the core network infrastructure. And this is only a capability that MNOs and full MVNOs have in hands. So this is one of the key assets that are necessary to produce some network flexibilities, also some troubleshooting capabilities to do traces in the network, and that have improved hooks and visibility on the behavior of the SIM and the type of attachment, the way the SIM behaves on a given visited network. So the capacity to produce the SIM, it's the electrical profile, and through OTA procedures, upgrade, maintain the SIM's profile is key for these assets.
Thanks, Cyril. This is a question for Dan. Somebody says, in your summary, you mentioned that 50% of connections are going to be cellular, but in one of the slides, you show Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and 802.415 as the most popular. Could you please explain this, Dan?
Yeah. So I apologize. Maybe that should have been more clear. So remember that the Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and 802.15 connections are off of the transport, the backhaul connections, and those are either cellular, satellite, or fixed line. So you can't really, the Bluetooth connections and those short-range wireless are intended, and that was put in there, intended to show how there's just going to be a lot more sensors deployed, which are going to add to the total amount of data. But in terms of backhaul connections, when you look at cellular, satellite, and fixed line, because of the growth of cellular in the market, it's certainly less than 50% now, and if you had the slide, you could see it's probably about 30% relative to satellite and fixed line. However, because of the difference in growth rates where cellular is actually growing faster, it will be nearly equal to the total number of fixed line and satellite connections in the market by 2020. So that's, i.e., about 50% of connections in 2020 will be cellular.
Okay. Dan, thank you. I'm conscious of time, and we have very little of it left. So we've got just enough time for one more question, which I think could probably be handled either by Scott or Cyril. I'll leave whoever feels most in the best place to answer this to do so. The question is the lack of deployed solutions due to customers' understanding of those solutions, availability of solutions, or just the maturity of solutions? What is it that's holding back the deployment of solutions?
Well, I think, Dan's slides talked a lot to this, so did ours. Certainly our view of it is that an IoT solution from a customer's perspective is, requires a number of vendors to support it today, a lot of complexity and a lot of unknowns, right? A lot of uncertainty in the business model, and that's, to me, where we are as a market. So what we're trying to do with solutions like this, from Sierra Wireless, trying to bring a device-to-cloud capability to customers, so that as much as we can solve, with a single vendor, a lot of their infrastructure and connectivity issues, helps to simplify that business case. And that's what the market needs. It needs simplified infrastructure, faster time to market for solutions, and more simple vendor management. So from our perspective, that's one of the big factors impacting how many solutions are out there today. And I think some of Dan's slides talk to that as well.
I think that really neatly sums up the state of the market and wraps up today's event very well. I just want to thank you all for your replies, gentlemen. We're almost out of time now, so let me just remind everyone on the call to please keep an eye on the website at iot-now.com. You're going to be able to stream this webinar from the site very soon, and you'll find the latest news there, plus daily blogs and videos, as you may already know. It just remains for me to say a huge thank you to our speakers. They are Dan Shea, Managing Director and Vice President, Business to Business of ABI Research. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Great to be here.
Thanks. And Scott Waldron, Director of Marketing for Cloud and Connectivity Services at Sierra Wireless. We really appreciate your input, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Enjoyed being here today.
And last but by no means least, Cyril Olin, Vice President, Product Strategy and Marketing, Cloud and Connectivity Services, also from Sierra Wireless. It's been great to have you here, Cyril, and thank you for taking so many of the questions.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for having us.
Most of all, I'd like to thank all of you who have joined us today, wherever you are. Keep safe, and we really appreciate the time you spent with us. From everyone here at IoT Now, we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.